and I will tell you as soon as it's a go. And I will tell you as soon as it's a go. And we are live. Okay, I do think that I'm going to have to at least close this screen down. Otherwise, I'm going to get some back feed. And I will tell you.
Yes, we do hear the back feed.
Okay, well, I've just shut it down. So, but we are live. All right. Well, my name is Pascal Fettig. I'm President and CEO of Mental Health America in Indiana. We're located here in Lebanon, Indiana. And it's really, I'm really grateful and honored to be here with all of you, the panels and the attendees, to discuss, it's a very important need for the population that we closely work with. In the case of Mental Health America, we work with very closely with victims and survivors of domestic violence. We provide a housing program, hence why this is extremely important. And we also work with a lot of youth. And throughout the years, we did find out that a support animal is so important to just your mental health as a whole. And, you know, and we firmly believe that a healthy mind will also lead to a healthy body. So this is a very sensitive yet very important subject. And I had the privilege of meeting Leslie and Angela, who educated me on my lack of knowledge, and we made the decision that is likely the same for a lot of you who have registered. So we hope we're going to enlighten you to some information, some great information on the importance of this subject. I do want to say one thing. Our panel, quite a few of our panelists are attorneys. And I say this because I'm going to speak for Mental Health America. We're not here to provide you with legal advice. We're just hoping that we can provide you guidance and we'll you know, through this touchy subject. But if you ever have a question, you want to consult your attorney or an attorney yourself directly, because we're not going to, we stand by what we're going to provide you, but we will not do it in court, if you will. So it is very important for you to know that this is not intended to give you legal advice, but really is going to open up your awareness to this subject. I'm going to let each of our panelists introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about what they do and why this subject is important to them. And I'll start with my partner in crime, and Katie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Pollack. I'm an attorney and Senior Vice President at Mental Health America, Boone County. I work every day with Pascal, and I would say primarily work with survivors of domestic violence and work heavily in that area of our programming. As Pascal stated, I too have a lot to learn about animals and assisting those with disabilities and what that means in terms of people's rights and housing in the area of housing. And so I'm excited to be here and learn. And also I will be monitoring the Q&A and the chat as well. Like Pascal said, go ahead and throw any questions you have in the Q&A. We're going to try to likely save those for toward the end of the presentations, or I should say till the end of our session. And then you're welcome to share your info in the chat. And I will also be sharing some resources in the chat as well, and hopefully sending out all these resources in the coming days following the webinar too in an email. So be looking for that.
Abby.
Good afternoon. My name is Abby Volan. I'm president of Opening Doors. We are a consulting and legal firm that essentially helps housing providers create and implement healthy, happy, pet-friendly communities. And we also have a focus in disability law, disability rights law. So essentially animal accommodation stuff is what I do with most of my time. And I got into this, I dabbled in public health and I dabbled in animal welfare. And the issue that kept coming together was healthy communities, and housing is really the linchpin of healthy communities. And people with pets are significantly more housing unstable than others in the community. And these disability rights laws really do, they can be very powerful in how they help people access stable housing. I apologize, Portia may be entering and exiting. I will do my best to keep her off camera.
All right, Leslie, and also Leslie, if you would, as we go, you have a couple flyers and information pieces that you want to put up on the screen. Just let me know when you're ready for everyone to view those, and we'll put them up.
Okay, will do. Hi, everybody. I'm Leslie Brooks. I am a veterinarian in Indianapolis, Indiana, involved with this kind of conversation through my work with the SOAR initiative, or Street Outreach and Response Initiative. We work with people who are experiencing either homelessness or crisis who also have pets. And so we've definitely worked with a lot of people in advocating for their rights in housing. And we see a lot of barriers because of what the pet can cause, but at the same time, the benefits of the individual in crisis. And with that, I'll lead to Angela Hobson, maybe, to do her intro.
Hi, I'm Angela Hobson. I'm the executive director of the SOAR initiative. I'm fortunate enough to work with Leslie. Thanks for having me. I think Leslie's given us a good intro. We work with folks that are in crisis, a lot of homelessness, domestic violence, people who are hospitalized, many people who are disabled or who have chronic illness, primarily who have pets.
And Matt?
Hello, everyone. I'm Matt Taylor. I'm the president of the board for Mental Health America, Boone County. I also am the broker owner of DM Taylor Realty and the owner of Douglas Homes, which is a landlord type business that focuses on mostly single family and small commercial properties. So I hope today to be on both sides of the table, from the mental health portion, working closely with Pascal and Katie, and also from the real estate side of things as well.
All right, well, thank you very much. And as I said earlier, I'm so honored to be with all of you and excited to provide this information. Our webinar is going to be formatted almost wholly in a question and answer format. We have some questions, and we're hoping that questions will pop up on the Q&A. But the panelists, may deepen into the discussion as we pose their questions. So with that, I will let Katie start us off.
Hello, everybody, again, and thank you for being here once again. My first question is, in general, with regard to animals and pets, and also with regard to working animals and assistance animals. Can anyone explain the difference and the importance of both working animals and pets in people's lives and the benefits that animals can have?
I'd like to start a little bit on this. I think that what we found working with individuals, the importance of pets and working animals, there's a similarity there in that animals provide a tool for individuals to access some of the things that they need. We find people that we work with, especially those that have mental health concerns, and those that have been isolated due to disability, often use the animal as a connectivity source to reach the things that they need for themselves health-wise. We also find that for some people, both for assistance animals and pets, that it's the only thing that keeps people getting up sometimes in the morning, mobile, following a routine. It gives them a reason to live. With the service animals, obviously there's a difference there, and that the service animals are providing a job that helps relieve some of the disabilities that people may face. And so they may be needed to even access day-to-day type medications, to get to places, to guide, to open fridge, to alert. So there's a more profound need there with the service animal. But I did want to talk at some point about the emotional support and service assistance animal differences. So one of the things that I saw on the questioning that I just wanted to mention is that there was a question about what is the difference. I'll let Leslie do kind of the definitions because I know that she has a great visual for this. The difference for me that I have found is really in training and accommodation. So service animals are specifically trained for a task to alleviate one or more symptoms of a disability, whereas assistance animals do not have to have that training. Another difference is accommodation. So a service animal has to be accommodated in the spaces that it's like a medical device, just like your wheelchair, or if someone needs to bring an oxygen tank, the animal is no longer considered a companion animal. It's actually a medical support device. And so it has to be accommodated in public spaces. Whereas the assistance animal we only have allowances really at this point for housing. We don't see that. We used to see it also sometimes with air travel and whatnot, but we don't see a lot of accommodations for assistance animals. I think that one of the conundrums I just would like to say briefly is that we in our work with folks that are experiencing homelessness or domestic violence, we are normally working with service or assistance animals, and they're called emotional support animals for the majority of our clients. If they're not identified as service animals for their disability, trained in a specific task, and emotional support animals. We don't like this term, and we hope that someday that changes, because the value that the animals provide to the people that we serve are immeasurable. And I think that for many of us who are not experiencing disability, our animals provide those sorts of benefits. It doesn't quite give to the value of what animals are providing in people's lives for us to have this distinction. And sometimes the line for some of our clients between emotional support and service animals is very thin. But we tend to see that providers will categorize them as emotional support before they will service, even if they have been trained. I don't know, Leslie, do you want to do some on the definitions?
Yeah, I can. If there's a way for me to share my screen, let me know. Or Katie, if you have a way to maybe put in the chat the PDF document that I sent about the distinction between what is a service animal versus emotional support animal versus pet. Because I think that's definitely probably the first part in trying to, figure all this out.
I will do that. And then I think Pascal can share as well on our screen so that everyone can take a look.
Yep. And so I'll just go through that a little bit. So as Angela mentioned, a service animal is specifically an animal that has been trained to perform a specific task to help a person with a disability. In this document, we have that it can be a dog, because it's also limited in species by law. So we had that it's a dog or a miniature horse, but I just read something today, and Abby, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that they changed that to where it's only a dog. But my thing was from 2011. Abby, do you know, is it still miniature horses included in that?
I haven't seen that miniature horse was excluded, but I think, you're going to have to make an argument for a miniature horse.
Right. Yes. Especially for housing. For our purposes right now, it has to be a dog. It can't be a cat. It can't be a bird, but it has to be a dog that's labeled as a service animal. And again, they have to be trained to perform a specific task to help with a disability. Now, these tasks, they can include the obvious where, that we're used to, like seeing people with their seeing eye dogs, helping them to get around, pulling a wheelchair, alerting a person to sounds. But it can also be something that you don't see and you don't necessarily know just by looking at the person and their dog. So for instance, that dog could be trained in reminding a person to take a medication or alerting the person to an impending seizure, and many other things. It can be trained in alerting someone to their blood sugar levels and various things. And then service animals are also protected for people with disabilities through the American with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Act. So as Angela mentioned, they're supposed to be accommodated who are on like public transportation, in grocery stores, those types of things, in addition to housing. Whereas a emotional support, which, let me step back just a second. So technically, we consider all of these animals that help people as assistance animals. So service animal could also be considered an assistance animal, and an emotional support animal is a type of assistance animal. But we just kind of lump them, the most common type, as emotional support animal, but an emotional support animal is a type of assistance animal. So the difference between an emotional support or assistance animal and a service animal is that the emotional support animal can be any type of species that's a common type of household pet. So it doesn't have to be just a dog. It can be a cat. It can be a small rodent, a fish, a turtle, a rabbit, little birds that people keep. And later on, I'll provide the actual document that goes into more specifics on each animal. Now, it cannot be a farm animal or an animal that's used for commercial purposes, but it can be more than just a dog. And an assistance animal does not have to be trained in a specific task. So they are not required to have gone through any kind of training. They, for the most part, they are used as an aid for this person, and they alleviate a symptom or effect of a disability. Let's see, and so they're protected by the Fair Housing Act, but not necessarily by the Americans with Disabilities Act. So they are not supposed to be accommodated for out in public, but they are supposed to be accommodated for housing. And then a pet is, typically what we would just think of like as an animal companion. They don't alleviate a symptom or effect of a disability. They aren't trained to do a specific task. It would just be like, someone like me who I don't identify with any type of disability, but I have a cat that lives with me just for companionship for me to take. And so those are the main three differences. And, we can often argue, and we'll get into the legal aspects of what you can ask and cannot ask about determining whether a person's pet is one of these categories. But we'll find out the waters are muddied between what is a pet versus an assistance animal, because for a lot of people, they might have an undiagnosed disability, or their pet, even though it's not, like, for, a lot of you probably resonate with this, like your pet, you can say, it is my emotional support animal. I've had a hard day at work. I come home and it helps me de-stress, even though it might not be, a specific diagnosis or you have a letter from your physician. So the waters can definitely be muddied there. But we just want to make sure that we're providing the information so that we're helping those with the actual disability that really, really needs these animals to be accommodated in housing. So.
Okay, and we can make this documentation available to you, and we're actually probably going to post it on our website as well, if that's okay.
Yes.
Also, Leslie, I opened it up for you to share your own documents. So on the next one, you can go ahead and share it yourself.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So we kind of jumped into our second question, which is great, but it led me to a quick question because I was going to pose that. I found it interesting that you wanted to veer away from the emotional support designation, and I'm assuming that you want to go to assistance. But if not, what term would you use that would be better? And maybe we can, start pushing for that.
May I
think
jump
that-
in? This is fine. So the reason I hate the term emotional support animal is because one, it's further stigmatizing. It's become a joke. It actually, it lets whoever you're asking the reasonable accommodation from, it's giving them more information than they're actually entitled to. And we don't call clinicians emotional support doctors or antidepressants emotional support medication. So I really don't like that term, and it's limited. The universe of impairments for which animals can help us is limitless, absolutely limitless. So, we're dealing with mental health. So I don't know, I don't know that emotional health or emotional support is something that's a term that's used a lot. That's certainly your bailiwick. But I just like to call them assistance animals because, an assistance animal that helps with depression is exactly the same that helps with pain from cancer treatment. So, I don't like to distinguish. I want to treat them all the same. So I also don't say a psychiatric service dog. No, it is a service dog. There is no special designation for a psychiatric versus other types. So to me, it's all about reducing stigmas.
I'm gonna follow through on that. I was actually gonna refer to you first because I know that you and I have a lot of similar thoughts on this vein. I agree with Abby that calling it an emotional support dog at this point has become a mockery. There's been a lot of criticism of clients with disabilities, scrutiny of clients that have disabilities with emotional support animals because there's this idea that there are a lot of people that are abusing the system. There's not really the evidence to back that. And so what we see is that most folks that have an emotional support animal are scrutinized and face a lot of barriers into accessing housing or validating the animal that they need. I'm not sure for me if the distinction area is necessarily that it's called an emotional support animal, because we see emotional support animals that are technically really service animals. But there is now a hesitation for people to provide the appropriate documentation for their clientele because of the skepticism of these animals in housing. And so I do think that assistance animal is the correct term, but I worry that once we take out the emotional support, we're still going to then the stigma is then going to be put to assistance animals because we have an attitude out here that misunderstands the need that people have for these pets. I have a lot of veterans whose dogs are, a lot of veterans who have PTSD and other physical disabilities that are not always outwardly visible. And their dogs are definitely service animals. They have been trained specific to a task. However, they may not have that documentation any longer, and they find it very difficult as they transition through the medical system to find doctors to validate those animals. I'm a little concerned as we mature how we identify these animals and what labels we use them and the distinctions we make between service animals and assistance animals, that the hardship is going to fall on those that need them. So many people that have disabilities can't afford to do some of the extensive medical training that some dogs may need to be service animals. But many of the clients that we serve have had long-standing disability that also impacts their income disparately. And so they're not able to have a higher level of training scrutiny. And it's not required that they're trained in a $20,000 program in order to be a service animal. And there are people who are able to train those pets outside of that realm. I worry as we change the distinctions that there is going to be more scrutiny in the process that will make it even harder for our folks to get any sort of distinction, whether assistance or service animals, as we kind of finesse what that looks like and is useful both on the end of us and our clients and their working animals, as well as navigating public spaces and wanting to keep the public safe and qualified animals being the ones that are approved. Those are kind of my initial thoughts, but I agree mostly with Abby that we need to nix emotional support animals as a label and just go to assistance or create something different. But we also need to start addressing the importance of the value of these animals to people in society that have disabilities.
Okay, and thank you very much. That also covered our next question, I think. So the next question that we're going to pose is also going to help us lead to a question that we're going to have for Matt as well. He just doesn't know it yet. But in our community, what do you see as the biggest challenge disabled assistant animal owners face on a regular basis?
Is that to me, to Matt?
Up to anybody.
No. Well, anyone that wants to answer. We have a question for Matt coming up.
I'll just, and I'm sure Abby and Angela can elaborate on it. I mean, I would say accessible and affordable housing is going to be number one. And then another one that we see, at least through the SOAR initiative, is access to medical care, because they don't have, unfortunately, a lot of people that rely on pets for mental and emotional health don't have a large human support system. And so they will turn down medical treatment if it means they have to go into the hospital system and take care of their pet. So I would say those are the two main, from my perspective.
Okay, does anyone want to?
I think Abby was going to say something, but she was on mute.
As I said before, it's limitless. And certainly as more research is coming out, we're learning all the ways animals can aid us. As I was going through cancer treatment, I had my day nurse who just wrapped herself around my neck during the day, wouldn't take her eyes off of me. And my night nurse who slept above my head at night. Those are assistance animals. They weren't emotional support animals. So it's really limitless. But one thing that's important to keep in mind, yes, service animals need to be trained. They do not have to be professionally trained. And I think that's so important because that goes to the issue of access. That individuals who can't afford to have a fancy training, you can train your own service animal. And so that's just really helpful to keep in mind.
I'm glad you said that because I developed a new question, which was going to be just that. I felt that trying to get into a certified service animal might be prohibitive with a tremendous amount of population that we work with. That's for sure. Well, Matt, we kind of have a question for you, and actually Leslie may want to jump in on that one as well. So with your background in real estate, what are concerns you have ran into in the past with regards to making accommodation in regards to animals, whether they be pets, service or assistance animal? We can say that. and have you ever been in this situation or know a fellow landlord who has been, and how they dealt with it, and what those challenges have been?
Definitely. I think the biggest issue that we run into is really transparency of the law of service versus emotional support, everything we're talking about. And on top of that, reliable resources. I want to be part of the solution, but I also am not a mental health expert. I'm not a cancer expert. Whatever the pet may provide, it'd be nice to have resources. So these types of events are nice to provide that, because now I have some things I can go to. I have people I can bounce ideas off of and be part of that solution. I've had a few engagements, not as many as others, but I think it needs to be a collaboration. I think we need to educate ourselves on both sides of the table, because that's where I've been lacking, to be quite honest. I didn't fully understand it. And this helps a lot. And when you talked about some of the hurdles we run into is it is a large investment. When you have a property, it's a very large investment that someone makes. And I think there's liability that's involved, and those are my concerns. being part of the solution. When we all communicate and we have that, I think we can reach those goals. But on the negative side, what you'll hear a lot from landlords is we have to protect our investment in our asset. And how do we accomplish that? And not only on property damage, but liability in regards to are the animals trained? What questions you can and can't ask. Those are a lot of things that are coming to light, I think, today, and we're breaking the stigma, talking about it, having more resources available. So I think by doing that, it's going to be much more collaborative effort to overcome those hurdles.
Matt, one thing that I find with housing providers is, there's so much confusion around these laws, and housing providers, for the most part, are so spooked of fear of getting dinged for a fair housing violation that, they and their lawyers will say, just, whenever someone makes a request, just let them in. Or, someone has a pet that's not behaving, or an assistance animal that's not behaving, well, too bad, you can't get rid of it. It's not true. Housing providers have rights, and they often don't assert them, and they should. And I think really the benefit of clearing up the misconceptions about the law is that once you do that and everybody asserts their rights, that's when you're going to be able to resolve a lot of these problems. If an animal is posing a direct threat to the health and safety of others, that specific animal, you can have that animal removed from the property. If somebody is causing, they're not picking up the poop ever, and they've been warned several times, the animal can be taken off the property. If the verification letter is not reliable, you should engage in the interactive process, but you do not need to automatically grant that request. And so, I always tell housing providers that you should assert your rights.
Very good. Very good to know.
Transitioning on that note, Abby, can you give us, or any of the panelists who want to jump in as well, just a brief nutshell overview of the legal protections for assistance animal owners with disabilities who are seeking housing, and what laws control in this instance?
I'll try to keep this brief. The first thing I want to talk about actually is the definition of disability. These are civil rights laws. There's the word disability has its own connotation, and there are disability entitlement laws and Social Security. This is about civil rights. And civil rights are meant to be applied broadly, widely. Essentially, tie goes to the runner. If you have any doubt that someone's living with a disability, tie goes to the runner, just assume that they are. The purpose of these civil rights laws is to determine if somebody is being discriminated against, not if somebody is living with a disability. And a disability under these civil rights laws is a physical or mental impairment that makes it, that substantially limits an individual's ability to engage in major life activities. And what the regs say about that, what the regulations say about that is, if an impairment makes it more difficult to perform the daily life activity than the average person, that's considered a disability under these laws. So it's really broad. It is a low bar to clear. So this idea that there's fraud, people are faking it, that's just not true. And part of that narrative comes from not understanding what definition of disability we're using. And so it applies for the Fair Housing Act, for the Americans with Disabilities Act, and frankly, what might be most helpful for this crowd is the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, because what that law does is it prevents discrimination for any services or programs that receive federal financial assistance. So, there certainly are, for the most part, homeless shelters, for example, they are considered dwellings, but there is an argument that it may not. If you're looking at, duration and a place that the person is expected to come back to, there is certainly an argument that it's not considered a dwelling and therefore not subject to the Fair Housing Act. And it's Americans with Disabilities Act, but that's not going to help you with an assistance animal. But the Rehabilitation Act, and a lot of homeless shelters do receive federal financial funding, financial assistance, then they do have to allow in the assistance animal, regardless of whether or not they fall under Fair Housing Act. So that's just a really important one to have in your back pocket.
You're muted, Pascal.
We have quite a few attendees that are in the business of sheltering, whether it be domestic violence or homelessness. So if you have any questions, then please put them on. And I know we do a lot of meetings, and there's been questions before I got to meet Angela and Leslie. There had been questions on this subject. So please do so as we go. But I think the next question is still for Abby as well. Katie?
Yes. The next question is, does a person who possesses a service or emotional support or assistance animal need to provide certification or verification of a service animal or an emotional support animal letter? And if so, what needs to be in that verification or letter, and who needs to have written that letter?
Great question. So if you have an obvious disability or an obvious need for the animal, and need means that the animal alleviates a symptom or effect of the impairment. So if whatever element is obvious, like an individual who's blind with a guide dog, no verification is necessary. Done. If it's not obvious for a service animal, you're allowed to ask 2 questions. Is this animal needed because of a disability? Yes or no? What is the animal trained to do? You cannot say, okay, now make your dog do that task. It's honor system, and they don't have to reveal their diagnosis either, but they do have to say, what task they do, and that's going to give some insight as to how they help the animal. So an example of a service animal where the disability is obvious, but the need is not, let's say you have someone in a wheelchair and they have a dog with them and it's not clear what the dog is for. So you can't ask them for any verification about their disability, but if you can ask them, what is your dog trained to do? And maybe the dog is trained to, open doors or something like that. When it comes to assistance animals, we're talking about the Fair Housing Act. And with assistance animals, again, if an element is not obvious, you may ask for reliable reliable verification from a third party who knows the facts. So in most cases, it's going to be a clinician, a doctor, a healthcare worker, but it does not need to be. So an example that always comes to mind for me is a peer support group. Let's say someone's in AA and their dog is the one, or their cat is the one thing keeping them sober. It's the thing that's helped the most. And it doesn't have to be the thing that helps the most. But so this person is, in AA and they're talking about their dog and they're not in therapy or anything like that. And so they go to their landlord and they say, I have an assistance animal. Well, frankly, a letter from someone in the peer group is going to be a whole lot more reliable than if they go online and take a survey and a doctor spits out a letter. So the letter just needs to be reliable. So that is certainly something that is in the housing providers. They're the ones that get to judge that, but it has to be in good faith.
Wonderful. And our next question was going to be for Matt, but we just got a question in a Q&A, and I think it's a good question. So Carla Kilgore says, we are a shelter and want to be accommodating as we are legally required, while also recognizing that one of our staff is severely allergic to cats, causing a health risk for her with asthma and other challenges. Is there guidance on how to balance accommodating those needs while also not sacrificing her health?
Yeah, that's another great question. There is guidance, but it's real loosey-goosey. The guidance says, well, you got to find a way to accommodate both. So that's not so easy to do. But when you have competing disabilities, one doesn't trump another. So you have to try to find ways to accommodate both, whether that means, getting first, the other person should have to submit a reasonable accommodation request themselves, right? And what is a reasonable accommodation request for? Perhaps it's for air filters, or maybe you can section off part of the facility where there are no pets allowed or no animals allowed in that area. Sometimes you have to be creative, and sometimes you are not able to accommodate both. There is no magic formula. I would just say proceed with caution.
Thank you, Carla. And Matt, and actually, this may be a question for a few of you. And I know the next one will be in that, Leslie, on the question following this one, that might be one you want to put up your other documentation. But Matt, are there any creative ways that you know of or have used that landlords and tenants can work together to achieve the best results for a disabled person?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's endless, really. I think the key is it always needs to be a collaboration. Abby touched on this a bit of there's rights on both sides of the tables. Unfortunately, I think with uneducation, we see headbutting. We have the landlord on one side and the emotional support animal, or the service animal on the other side, and it's really working together what those needs are. Once again, through education, as we talked about. I know there's HIPAA laws, a lot of things we can't go into, but yeah, I think it is. And one thing that I know it's hard to quantify, I think would be very helpful too, are as time goes by, I think there will be more studies. I'm huge on facts and data on how this can help people that don't see this or don't work with people that have these issues. It's alarming how helpful it can be. So I think any data and facts and studies and writing would be great to provide to show that they work. Well, obviously without crossing lines there, but it needs to be a win-win. It's something that works for both parties. We all need to understand our rights, and we all need to be supportive and helping people get through their day.
I'm sorry, one thing I want to add about the verification letter, and it crossed my mind because Matt, what you said about HIPAA, a lot of housing providers have been coached through some of their trade organizations to really harass the provider so that the provider will think twice before they write another letter. And that is not allowed. Housing provider, they are not entitled to know your diagnosis. They are not entitled to access medical records. They are not entitled to request access to a doctor. Now, when it comes to verifying the letter, what I always recommend is you can authenticate it. You can call whoever wrote the letter and you can say, is this your signature? Did you write this letter? But beyond that, you're putting yourself in some hot water. And HUD actually specifically addressed this when they changed their guidance memo a year ago, saying housing providers, you cannot harass people who write these letters. So that if a housing provider comes back to you and says this letter isn't any good, I want to see the diagnosis, that's not right. Don't be bullied by that.
Okay. Could I add something to that real quick? So in practice, what we see a lot of with folks that are trying to get into housing or that have disabilities, especially in the vulnerable population, is that certain entities, both with service animals and emotional support animals, are requiring some sort of badge or identification. Sadly, we've seen this a lot with the VA, especially for clients who are going into programming where their service animal is allowed, and they are making them go online and register the animal and do a badge of sorts. These are not legitimate. This is not what is in the ADA. And I'd like to see less of that. We also see that a lot for folks that are trying to get into certain public facilities, and to access a facility, they're required to show a purchased badge, or these organizations that are online are not legitimate. And I just want maybe a more clear thing that the letter can come from the type of places that Abby has described. We often see mental health clinicians or therapists, doctors, even medical social workers that provide these letters. And the stigma is really making it so that providers are refusing to provide letters for animals that they know that have value, for fear that they're going to have scrutiny as well. And we hate to see that.
And Katie posted a couple links that we got from Abby for reliable resources. And I'm glad we said that, because I do want to mention that the internet is loaded with erroneous information. So Dr. Google is not always know-all. Wikipedia, not always know-all. So really get reliable resources when you're looking at what your options and obligations are. We have a couple questions that we're going to go through, and then we have another question on the question and answer that I think needs to be asked as well. So speaking of internet, Abby and Leslie, or anybody else. So my understanding is that the Fair Housing Act states that a housing provider must make efforts to accommodate an emotional support animal. But the law also acknowledges that in some cases it may not be possible. Does that mean in certain situations, a landlord can deny a support animal? And if so, what are those situations?
So I'm not quite sure what you mean by where the law says it's not possible. So if somebody it's called a reasonable accommodation for a reason. It has to be reasonable. If it poses an undue burden, which is a financial or administrative burden, then the housing provider can argue that it's unreasonable and I don't have to provide this accommodation. That is actually very difficult to prove. However, there are reasons why an animal or request can be denied or the permission rescinded. So if somebody does not provide reliable information establishing that they're living with a disability or have a related need, and you've engaged in the interactive process and still nothing, you do not have to grant that request. If the specific animal, and it can't be just from breed, stereotypes or anything like that, if that specific animal in question poses a direct threat to the health and safety of others that you find, that animal can be removed from the premises if there's no other way to mitigate the danger, and same with property damage, and same with nuisance issues. So the person has to be given the opportunity to cure, but beyond that, if the animal is just posing a nuisance to the community, I mean, you still have to be a good neighbor. You still have to pick up your poop. You still have to make sure your dog isn't barking all day, and your cat isn't peeing all over the place and bothering the neighbors. So you still have to be a good community member.
Pascal, do we want to ask the question in the chat?
Leslie, did you want to add to that? I don't really know when you want to bring up your HUD assistance document.
I think what she said was perfect. I went ahead and put the HUD assistance document in the chat.
Okay, great.
So it's in there at the timestamp of 2:43. I did also want to add that there's no breed restrictions either. And Abby, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no breed restrictions. So you can't deny an animal as an assistance animal, even if it's a German Shepherd or a Pit Bull. They must be accommodated as well, unless of course they are posing a danger to someone, like they're biting neighbors or something like that. So.
Okay, great. Let's go ahead and ask the question from Anne.
Anne says, if I rent out a unit or a room under the initial advertisement of pet-free house and the tenant becomes disabled at a date after the start of the lease and wishes to procure a support animal, what are my obligations? Am I legally obligated to release someone from a rental agreement?
That's a great question, without an easy answer. The first thing that strikes me is this unit subject to the Fair Housing Act? There are some exceptions. They're very limited, but they do exist. And I think someone who rents out, 3 or fewer units and they don't use a professional broker or anything like that, they're not subject to the Fair Housing Act. In which case, no, you don't have to make that accommodation. If you are, and in that case, perhaps the reasonable accommodation would be letting them out of the lease, right? Like you have to, what is an alternative accommodation going to be if you don't want to allow an animal? Now it says pet-free housing. Service and assistance animals aren't pets, which is why pet rules don't apply to them. So breed weight restrictions or number limits or pet fees, anything like that, they don't apply to assistance animals. Only public health requirements do, so licensing and vaccination and that kind of stuff. But even state laws that conflict with the Fair Housing Act, the Fair Housing Act controls. So if you in Miami, you still have, they outlaw pit bulls, but they would have to allow them. So if you are not subject to the Fair Housing Act, you don't have to allow in a service or assistance animal at any time. And perhaps the accommodation would be to release them from the rental agreement. If you are subject to the Fair Housing Act, you got to let them have the service or assistance animal, regardless of whether or of when they make the request.
Okay, we have a
Go ahead, Pascal.
We have a follow-up from Ann as well, and it may apply to a situation that I heard about a cat being in a shelter where the cat ran around the entire shelter, and the directors and staff did not know if they could restrict that cat to the actual room. But also Ann followed up saying, so it sounds like if I never wish to accommodate a service animal in my own private home to a roommate, I should specify that in my initial advertising and probably wouldn't have issues as a result.
I'm not going to provide you with specific legal advice on that. I'd say tread carefully, make sure you're not subject to the Fair Housing Act. And, you can say no pets, and then you can say in the lease, we're not subject to the Federal Fair Housing Act, so that's all you need to say. And then if someone comes back, you can show that you're not obligated to provide that accommodation.
Okay, and how about kind of what I posed? So if I understood this was a few meetings ago, there was a assistance cat with a domestic violence survivors. They had their own room, but they were in the residential. And so then the cat was let loose throughout the shelter and would spray and everything. And they weren't sure what they could do about that.
Nope. Especially because the cat was posing a nuisance, right? But in general, so in general, you can take animals, your service or assistance animal, to a common area in the dwelling. However, frankly, I don't think it's reasonable to bring a cat to let a cat just roam around the shelter. My cats are indoor cats. So letting them roam around, a big facility, that's just not reasonable. That's not good for anyone. And I think in that kind of situation, you are well within your right to require the cat to stay in that individual's room, both because one, it's common sense wise, if an animal is not on a leash, they do not need to be allowed in common areas. They must be under control, so in a carrier or on a leash. And then the fact that there's nuisance issues, that's a double no-no.
Can I piggyback on this too? There's a lot of times that we have clients that are in these positions that need an accommodation. And sometimes what we see happening is that there's automatically like an averse or oppositional kind of thing going on. And this can come from clients who have, specifically, we have a lot of clients who have mental health and are very protective over their pets. And so there's an additional behavior issue there that's worth navigating with some grace. And so we often provide extra large dog crates for clients who are in shared housing situations, and so that the other individual that is sharing the room with them may not like pets or may be scared of them. And so we will provide an extra large dog crate that a litter box can fit in, that the cat can fit in. This is usually going to be a temporary emergency situation. And the more we can do to honor how everyone feels and their needs, more judiciously, right? Like we're not doing it totally for the shelter. There should not be a cat running around an entire shelter of any sort. We sometimes find recovery houses that have a dog that everyone enjoys and everyone feels good about that, and that's excellent. But generally, not everyone is going to love animals, whether they're needed or not. We have to honor that. Because that is the way that we're going to find a middle ground in which we can allow pets to be accommodated so that they're not lost, their benefit is not lost to the owner, and that we're not toxifying landowners or organizational owners that are running these programs against future pets. Because in some of the dialogue that I've heard earlier, I'm really thankful for Matt being on here today and Abby, but when we see, what we see often is shelters or organizations or land owners that are trying to prohibit these pets, even if they're valid. Even in emergency sheltering situations, and with the pets, the service animals should be allowed. They're finding reasons to reject them, even though they're valid. And most of our clients don't have attorneys. They don't know that they're allowed to advocate. They're used to being told no. They're used to being treated differently and as lesser. And so they don't tend to advocate for themselves. And I'm really interested in finding ways to partner with these groups so that there is accountability for pets that are misbehaving, that we can get a pet spayed and vaccinated and make sure that there is, rather than going straight to an eviction process, can we work on the behavior and for the
Okay, I think we lost the audio with Angela, but thank you. I think we got it all, and I think it leads us into our next question, Katie, which I think is equally important. For as I said earlier, we have a scattered shelter, and we can explain that to you if we need to. But Katie has a question in regards to our position.
And I want to make sure I'm picking out the right question, Pascal. But do you just want to go ahead and ask, so I make sure we've skipped around a little bit. So I just want to make sure I'm looking at the right question. You go ahead and ask quickly what.
Okay, so briefly, the way our shelter is set up, and our transitional housing as well as our rapid housing, it's scattered housing. So we actually have individual homes, and we work with landlords. We don't own any of them. We're technically, especially in the transitional part of it, not the rapid house, but our emergency shelter, which is scattered, and the transitional that is scattered, we are initially the tenants. We signed a lease, and then we provide that accessibility to our survivors of domestic violence. We have no issue with support dogs or support animals or assistance animals of any kind. We have one here in the office, so we have no problem with it. But we have ran into a point where our landlords do, and of course, our lack of knowledge. Two things: we have to have a relationship with our landlords, so we don't necessarily cave on their needs, but we try to find ways around to get it worked. But one question, and I think it came up through my developing relationship with Leslie and Angela. The question is, the way we are set up, are we, MHABC, at risk of a lawsuit if one of our landlords denies the animal, where we are initially the tenant and our survivors are the subtenant? And we allow the animal, but the landlord may deny us. Where do we stand legally with that? Are we at risk? Abby, you're muted.
Yeah. Again, not providing legal advice, but from what you're describing, frankly, I would say that both you and the and your subtenant essentially have standing to file a fair housing violation claim. You're not denying it, right? It's the housing provider. So, you know, guests are allowed to have service and assistance animals. So perhaps this is somewhat like a guest or, you know, subtenant, whatever it is. I don't think you would be at risk. I think you would have standing to file a private lawsuit or to file a complaint with HUD or the state agency if applicable.
Okay. And by the way, we're about out of time. We went over a little bit, but we started a little late. We don't have any more questions in the Q&A, but I do feel we could go deeper in this conversation. So I'm just gonna put it out there that we may contact all of our panelists and set up for part 2. But I will put my email address in the chat box again. If any of the attendees have questions that they think of at a later date, please email them to us, and we will get you an answer or guidance towards an answer. And so
Can one more thing too, Paul?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. For those that are still on, it sounds like most of Indiana, definitely reach out to us at SOAR Initiative if you have further need of assistance trying to accommodate these, or for people that do have a assistance and needs help with training. Like obviously they don't have to be trained in a task, but we want to support this to make it just more pet friendly for everyone, for accessibility and affordability. But we want people to be responsible pet owners, and we can help them in that too. And so we can help assist with training the dog to like not bark at everything, or to, you know, walk on a leash appropriately, and educating the owner on why it's so important that they poop. And we can help provide vet care and supplies and all of those necessary things too. And so, you know, that's what we're here for. So reach out for us with any help in that. And if, you know, we've been pretty successful in encouraging pet owners to spay and neuter their pet through our communication and dialogue with them, and just educating them from the place where we stand. So, you know, you as landlords or like administrators in the shelter, you know, you might feel uncomfortable doing that, but that's where we can come in and help with that, and to make it just better for everybody. So reach out to us, SOAR Initiative. I'll put I think you already have our website information.
Yep,
but
I just shared it.
Okay.
So everyone can see it there, as well as Abby's organization.
Okay, does anyone else have any last words they might put out? Because I know everybody's time is valuable. We didn't cover all of our questions, so we'll probably we will send them out to you guys, including you, Matt. We have one more question for you, but if anyone has anything else they would like to relay, please do so. And if not, I want to reiterate that it has been an honor for me to meet with our panelists. And I hope that each of you that attended are a little bit more informed, if nothing else, even if you were confused a little bit about what was said throughout the webinar. We have the resources for you. Reach out if you need more. And whatever you do, you know, I'm going to say this, and the attorneys can smack me later, but actually none of you can reach me except for Katie. Put the law aside. You know, you have to do what's right, and you are bound by the laws for sure, but put the human being that you're dealing with ahead of anything. Try to realize what their issue is and what their needs are and why it's so important. Our animals, let's just call them pets, if you will, provide us with unconditional love. And as Angela and Leslie and Abby and Matt, who works with us, and definitely Katie and I, we work with I consider special population, but all of the population. our population, our survivors of domestic violence and our homeless have a hard time and maybe have never had support. But when it comes to their animals, it's unconditional. It's what they need. So let's accommodate for them, and let's get beyond the stigma, as there are many, towards all of these issues, and let's push. And if you're aware of somebody who is not allowing someone to benefit from this and initially break the law, say something. And if you're afraid to say something, contact me. And the little that I know, Leslie and Angela, contact them. They're going to say something. And that's what they're here for. Thank you very much. And be on the lookout for more of our webinar information. Abby, thank you for taking the time. Matt, Angela, Leslie, and of course you, Katie, thank you for taking the time. And we shall hopefully continue our relationship and see you soon.